You've done the hard part. You've built your story, developed your characters, and maybe you've even outlined a few scenes. But now, here comes the fun part, bringing it to life. Welcome to Panels in Progress. I'm Chris. We're talking about what happens after all the planning is done. The phase where you bring your comic to life through concept sketches, reference gathering, and exploring everything about how the comic looks, feels, and exploring how you want it to look and feel. Think of this as a visual storytelling warm-up, finding the style, tone, vibe, what makes the comic yours, what makes it unique to you. You've done all the planning, right? This is great. We're finally ready to pull out our sketchbooks. We're ready to pull out our drawing books or our iPads or tablets, and we're ready to get busy. We're ready to finally draw and doodle. Or maybe you're already very art forward and you've already started drawing, you've already started sketching, or you've already had these character ideas, but maybe you just need a little bit more to solidify them. To be honest, this is exactly where I am in the stage of working on Rim. I have drawn my characters a little bit. I've gotten the world figured out. I know the story, but I haven't really decided how I want the comic to look, how I want the characters to look, or how I want the environment to be portrayed. And to be honest, I did try drawing a lot of the characters, and I have drawn them in years past. However, I was never quite happy with the designs, and so I redesigned them. I'd like to warn you guys against that, because every time you redesign your comic, it takes you one step away from actually working on the story. I would advise just make your designs as best as they can and go for it. So I guess I need to take my own advice, is what I'm trying to say. Why don't we start with reference? Every strong comic has a clear visual identity. It doesn't mean that your art has to be perfect. It just means that it has to feel intentional. Start collecting references for character fashion, architecture and environment, color palettes you might want to use, lighting and mood. Ask yourself questions using your comic as a guideline. So if we're talking about characters, let's, instead of just saying, oh, I want to write or I want to draw a really cool looking character, think about what type of clothing would this character wear, considering their environment. Like if they live in a cold environment that's always snowing, you wouldn't put them in a tank top and shorts. Or if they live in a really hot environment, you wouldn't put them in a full body snowboarding suit. It has to make sense. So when you're designing your character, look for visual cues that will tie not only your character to the world, but be relevant to the story. Do they always wear their hair a certain type of way? What could be the reason for that? Do they always wear certain types of clothing? Do they carry a certain type of weapon? All of these types of things you should be thinking about as you're drawing. When it comes to drawing the environment or the world, start with where that character sleeps. You can learn a lot about the character by knowing what they need when they go to sleep, or what's in their kitchen or something like that. Think about, or make it a relevant scene. Like if you are drawing a scientist and you know that they spend a lot of the time in their office, a science lab, then you should really think about how you want this science lab to look and what type of things would be in it. Make sure that it makes sense. I know that when I first started designing Rim, my main character's name is Gray. His room, at first I made this gigantic room where he had lots of space for all of the things that a cool kid would have. However, now that I'm redesigning and rethinking about what's important to the story, I think he should have a much smaller space. And I think that space should really be filled up with a lot of school and academic things, because that is what his parents have pressured him to have. Yes, I'm going to add in like a small corner of things that he likes, but you'll see that there's going to be a big difference between what he's chosen to keep in his room versus what his parents have deemed should be in his room. So think about that when you're making the character as well as their environment. When it comes to color palettes, this one's interesting. Colors, I'm not going to get too deep into because I am still learning so much about color theory and more in the aspect of what colors evoke what moods. But think about the world that you're living in. Is the world bright and open where there's lots of green, lots of earth tones, lots of nature? Or is it very structure heavy where you have all these buildings, maybe there's a lot of smoke, pollution, things like that, where the colors would be darker in the world? So all of those things you should definitely think about when you're creating, and that color palette also plays off the lighting and the mood of the comic. If this is supposed to be a horror comic, you definitely would want a darker tone with less light because you want to make sure you have all the shadows that you need to show off whatever's happening in the scene. Whereas, let's say this is a kid's comic and it's supposed to be happy and upbeat, then you want to move towards maybe more saturated colors, more bright colors, and very few shadows. Just something to think about. And there's a couple different things that you can do to compile all your references. You could create a Pinterest board where, let's say, you have a character design board, a environment board, or just a mood board, or you can mix and match and make a board that has all of the things that are inspiring you for this comic all in one location. There's also PureRef, drag and drop your images and do some visual planning. I know that some people use Melanote. They can use basically a blank page and do the same thing, drag and drop and organize your ideas as kind of a mind mapping way to organize your ideas. You can also take real life pictures. If you're out about in the world and you see interesting buildings, interesting locations, or interesting people, you might want to ask for their permission before you go snapping pictures of random people that you see in the street. If you are out in the world and you see lots of interesting buildings, locations, people, clothing, whatever, cars, you can also just take pictures of that and use it to draw inspiration from as well. For example, Arcane created an entire mood board around oil paint texture mixed with steampunk French design. And if you haven't watched Arcane both seasons, not sure what you're waiting for. Really great stuff, visually pleasing. I mean, the story, depending on who you ask, you can take it or leave it. But for me, I thought the art direction for that series was 10 out of 10. Lore Olympus uses soft ethereal palettes, not for realism, but to reinforce emotional tone. Lore Olympus is a popular webtoon. Maybe you've heard of it. What's the feeling that you want people to get when they look at your comic, even if they haven't read a word? If you think about it, you can pick up a comic or a manga from your library or from your bookshelf or from the bookstore, and you know that sometimes when you look at a cover for a book, you can tell, like, oh, this is definitely going to be a horror, this is definitely going to be a fantasy, this is a romance, this is a mystery. Each book has its own design language that puts it in a genre that can easily identify people who are looking exactly for that. So now that you know your characters, ask yourself, how do they exist visually in the world? Focus on silhouette. Can they be identified by their shadow? Clothing, does it reflect their role, class, personality? Expression range, can you draw them sad, smug, furious, or joyful? This is really interesting. Think about your famous cartoons for this one. Bugs Bunny has a recognizable silhouette. Daffy Duck, you wouldn't confuse Daffy Duck with Donald Duck because they have very different silhouettes. Think about SpongeBob and Patrick and Mr. Krabs. They have their own recognizable silhouette. Think about Goku, has his own recognizable silhouette. Think about your character and what makes them unique. And even if they might not have a unique silhouette to stand out against all others, make sure that your main character's silhouette at least stands out against all the other silhouettes within your world, so that way your main character can always be identified. Clothing, I think this is important because depending on the world building, sometimes if you're creating a fantasy world or a world that is very different from our own world, then you do have to take some time and care to really think about what your characters are going to wear and what is useful to that character. Sometimes I think the easiest example when it comes to this is when I was growing up, a lot of main characters had goggles. And I had no idea why. Why did goggles just pop up in almost all the 90s anime that I watched? I still don't know the answer. Goggles are cool, but did those characters actually need the goggles? Probably not, because I never saw them actually use the goggles. So, just some food for thought. Expression range. This one is very, very important. You're making a comic, and I don't know how you feel about it, but for myself, when I read a comic, I like to see the emotion on their faces. I like to see open mouths while they're talking. I like to see the laugh lines, the smiling, the anger. I think that's one reason why I do tend to love manga so much, is because most of the manga that I do read is very expressive, even when they are over exaggerated in their expressions. There are some comics that also have those expressions too, but more often than not, I've seen comics where the person is talking, but it's just a straight line across their face, and it's like, if they're talking, their mouth should at least be open. Maybe not every single time, but most of the time. Or they're supposed to be sad, but they don't look sad. It can get really, it seems like something very simple, but I guess there's some artists that just don't think facial expressions are important, and I would really hope that you also enjoy seeing characters make facial expressions and show emotion, and that's how we really relate to the character, is what they're going through. So one of the things that you can do to practice this is do some character sheets. Do some, aside from the standard turnaround, knowing what your character looks like from the front, the side, and the back, like a animator would do. Also, do facial expression pages where you are going through the range of emotions. You can go you can do the simple emotions where it's, happy, sad, angry. Why did I completely blank on all the emotions? You can go through the basic emotions, but I would also push you to go through the subtle emotions. What's the difference between surprised and alert? It could be just the change of a slight eyebrow. Or what's the difference between aware and alarmed? I don't know. Challenge yourself to do those facial expressions. And then aside from the facial expressions, when you're creating your comic, you're not just you're telling a story, but you're also acting it out. And I think the second important thing, aside from the facial expressions, would be physical body expressions. So let your character act, let them shrug their shoulders, let their shoulders slump, let their head tilt to the side because they're unsure, change their posture, show the difference between a character that's confident with their chest out and a character that's shy and they're kind of rounded in on themselves. Like, you could do so much with the body, and if you're doing that with the body and the face at the same time, your mood and emotions are going to be very readable in your comic. Some of the examples: Power from Chainsaw Man. Her wild, chaotic design reflects her energy and unpredictability. Her silhouette, horns, and smirk are instantly recognizable. We've got Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle. Subtle visual evolution, her clothes and posture shift with her confidence and emotional arc. And then again, think about, like I said, Goku, that black hair, that orange jumpsuit, it's recognizable wherever you are, even if it's all blacked out. Backgrounds. Backgrounds aren't just decoration. They shape how the readers feel about the scene. Ask yourself, is your world cluttered or clean? Is it grounded or stylized? Does the environment support the mood of your story? A couple tips: identify 2 or 3 anchor locations, reoccurring places that happen in your story, and then treat them like characters. What's their vibe? What's their history? How do they change? I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's definitely worth saying again. You got to think about the world your character lives in, not just like a character that is a messy person. Their bedroom is going to look completely different from a character that is very clean and a perfectionist, if you will. Think about how different those two types of people would look. And when it comes to like, is your environment grounded or stylized? Grounded, I take that more as, is it based in the real world, where you're gonna like, a tree's gonna look like a tree, grass is gonna look like grass, a house is gonna look like a house. But if it's stylized, then you're using a different type of shape language to elaborate what a tree looks like in your world, or what a house could look like. Not all houses are boxes in your world. Maybe they're actually triangles or cylinders or something like that. You can push and pull your environments, but just you don't want your characters to look completely different from your environment. You want your characters to be able to live and be believable in their environment. I'll give you a couple of examples. Monstrous, it has gothic architecture and intricate textures to reinforce the ancient layered world and the dark tone. Blue Period, the school halls, bedrooms, and urban landscapes are emotionally charged through framing and lighting. Witch Hat Atelier, backgrounds feel like hand-drawn fairy tales. Soft edges, circular framing, and magical detail that invites the reader in. Like I said, always look to comics or manga or graphic novels, whatever you're reading, and instead of just enjoying the story, take a step back and look at it and see, like, how are they doing their backgrounds? How do their characters fit into their world? And then use those elements to influence your own. Tone, mood, and style. Some more questions you can ask yourself: is your comic gritty? Is it dreamy? Is it chaotic? Is it whimsical? Is it fantastical? Is it simple? You should kind of already have an idea of what you're going for long before you get to this point. But it's still good to note that if you're making a horror comic, it should be darker, it should be grittier, it should have edgier lines, because you're trying to evoke a certain feeling and emotion. But there are very clean comics too, and think about, if your story is, you need to think about what the overall tone of your story is, and make sure that your style that you're drawing is going to work for that story, because if not, it's going to be mismatched. It would be as if, like, think about Something is Killing the Children. If it wasn't that loose, dark, kind of muddy style, and everything was bright with vibrant colors, it wouldn't have the same effect that it does if it was drawn differently and colored differently than what we have. And the same with Saga. If Saga was drawn with darker colors, it wouldn't be perceived the way it was. If the inking was any different than how it was, the story would almost have a completely different feel than it does. Just keep that in mind as you start exploring panel layouts, dense versus airy, sharp angles versus rounded frames. Think about like how you're going to do your layouts. Are you going to have open spaces? Are your panels going to have borders? All things to think about. Coloring and shading. Is this going to be muted, saturated, monochrome with accents? And how's the lighting going to be? Natural, moody, high contrast? All things to think about. And you can actually, before you even start drawing the real comic, you can test all this stuff out. You can take some of these concepts and work them into just test panels. Think about like a small scene, maybe a page. Like you could do a 1-page test where you're testing out how your character fits into the world, you're testing out the color palette you want to use, you're testing out the type of brushes you want to use and things like that. Like, you don't have to do a whole comic in order to figure this thing out. You can do some test pages and see if you like the direction and how it feels, and if it matches, then go for it. Another idea is you could take different scenes and you could try different things. So like one scene could have black and white with heavy shadows, kind of like a manga style, maybe practice your screen tones. Another style could be warm pastel colors, and another could be a high saturated palette. Test out these different versions of your comic, even if it's the same thing. Or you could even take like an old comic that you did and you could do this and see if you could change the entire tone by either changing how much shadows are there or the saturation of your colors. Examples, we have Saga changes color and texture based on the planet, mood, and scene of the tone. Made in Abyss juxtaposes soft Studio Ghibli-like style with brutal, disturbing events. Tone is created through contrast. And Nimona, loose and expressive at the start, then tightens and darkens visually as the story becomes more serious. And side note, Nimona, the graphic novel, was amazing, really enjoyed it, but the movie was even more. It built upon that. Two very different, even though the story was basically the same, the way the movie handled the story I thought was just as good. So this is where the fun begins. Concepting isn't about perfection. It's about playing with how your comic feels. It's sketching wildly, testing color palettes, finding a posture of location that just clicks. It's where your story goes, from an outline to something you can actually see. So take your time here. Let your characters, your setting, and your tone evolve together. This is where it all begins. Like, if you're not passionate about this phase of it, finally seeing your ideas come to life, then maybe you don't want to make this comic all the way. And I mean, that's okay. You could do all this work, do all this planning, do some test pages, and discover that you're no longer interested in making this comic anymore, or it didn't turn out the way you thought it was, or what have you. But what's important is that you gave it a try. Alright, if you've been exploring the look of your comic or trying to get a feel for how it should look, let me know in the comment section below. What's your thoughts on the process? Have you done something similar to this? Have you done test pages before you actually started working on your comic? Or do you just jump into the comic day one, page one, and you try to figure it all out on the fly? Is it a success? I mean, let me know. Maybe I'm off base here, but for me, I think that the more I've thought about things in advance of the comic, the more I get excited about when I actually make the comic. Thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully you guys are making some amazing comic pages. I can't wait to hear all about them. See you guys in the next episode.